Now, this is a really interesting question. What if future Trunks was caught by the TVA from the Loki series? Firstly, for the bad news. The present timeline that we grew up watching would be classified as a Nexus event with future Trunks going back to try and change it. Meaning they would take future Trunks to then work at the TVA, and then they would delete the main timeline. Because, you gotta prevent the Nexus points. But now let's move on to something lighthearted, and genuinely hilarious in my opinion. Future Trunks in the TVA uniform. It would just feel so weird to see that. And Future Trunks' role while working in the TVA, he'd basically be their muscle if they were ever trying to detain variants that were more powerful than an average TVA agent can handle. Now, he would be devastated that his work is resulting in the destruction of countless timelines. But honestly, I don't think he would mind too much, because technically his timeline is the main timeline. Despite how sad and depressing it is, the Future Trunks timeline is technically the original timeline. So he'd have no worries of his timeline being erased at all. And imagine instead of having that little pruning stick, he just has a giant version of his Sword of Hope that works the same as a pruning stick. It's definitely far more intimidating than one. Todoroki with the powers of Natsu and Gray. That's just terrifying. God, I sound like a broken record. Everything you guys come up with is terrifying. Todoroki's already classified as a prodigy in My Hero. But now he's going to have fire as hot as that of a dragon's, and ice that could casually reach the temperatures of absolute zero. Not only that, this magic would be able to slay both dragons and demons. And he could amplify himself even further by stacking both Natsu and Gray's transformations on top of each other. Imagine having Natsu's half-dragon mode on his fire side, and having Gray's Ice Devil Slayer magic on his other side. Plus imagine he'd have a unique breath attack, similar to Natsu's Fire Dragon Breath, but also implements a mixture of fire and ice. Possibly a hypothetical freezing flame, where it can both burn you and freeze you at the same time. Basically Frostbite, but a billion times worse. Not only that, he'd have high resistance, if not full immunity, to fire and ice of any temperatures. Plus you could factor in Natsu's Fire Lightning Dragon Slayer mode, so if he ever needed to, he could absorb electric attacks too. Meaning if there's no fire or ice around, Kaminari could give him a snack. What if Asta were in My Hero Academia? Now his quirk would work similar to Mr. Aizawa's, except instead of looking to disable a quirk, he could cancel a quirk with physical touch. Whether he touches it with a part of his body, or an object that he imbues his quirk into. And in this situation, instead of swords, since obviously you can't go around swinging a sharp sword around, since he's a hero and all, I'll just give him two big one-handed metal staffs. And he can imbue his quirk into them, similar to how he imbues weapons with his anti-magic. So to put it simply, Asta's quirk would be anti-quirk. And it'll even work on mutation quirks. And no, I don't mean if he were to hit Ojiro in the stomach, his tail falls off. If it hits someone who has a mutation that has an extra part of their body, for the next couple minutes, that extra limb will just either become numb or not function the way they want it to.
Subject for today.
I could work with this. I'm handcuffed to someone who's rich for 50 hours? I get to eat and live well for the next 50 hours. Sweet. Interesting question. What if Naruto kept training instead of becoming the Hokage? To put it simply, he'd become exponentially more powerful than he ever was in canon. And the reason why is because once he became Hokage, his strength pretty much just stagnated. He wasn't growing that much stronger. And that's because he was either training weaker people to become stronger, therefore not pushing himself to his limits to grow more powerful, or was just too busy doing paperwork. Now, back to the actual training. Naruto using multiple shadow clones to train at the same time would be able to greatly accelerate the training process, therefore getting much stronger over a shorter span of time. Except now, instead of only being able to make a couple dozen clones like back then, adult Naruto can make thousands of clones. So let's just highball this and say he makes 10,000 clones. If he trained intensely for one day, if he spent one day training while using 10,000 clones, he'd basically have gotten 10,000 days of training completed in the span of only one day of training. which is honestly quite terrifying to think of. Especially seeing how much chakra Naruto actually has. He could just keep cycling through his clones, and if he did that from the end of Shippuden all the way to the events of Boruto, using those 10,000 clones every single day, it really wouldn't be that far-fetched to say that his base form by the time he's the age he is in Boruto, he'd at least be 10 times more powerful in his base form alone in any of his forms besides Baryon mode. And with how powerful his base form is, him with just regular old Sage mode would likely be on par to where he was at with Baryon mode. God forbid if this significantly stronger Naruto were to use the Baryon mode, he wouldn't just fight evenly with Ishiki, he'd likely just one-shot him. But to be completely honest, I don't even think he'd need Baryon mode to one-shot Ishiki with how powerful his base form would be at that point. What if Deku had Issei's multiplying power? And specifically, only the multiplying power. Firstly, the way I would have it work is, obviously, it would be a quirk. Firstly, for how the quirk works. Every 10 seconds, his strength, speed, and durability double. And once he turns his quirk off, his strength returns to that of his base level. And the downside to the quirk is, the more his power multiplies, the more of a strain it puts on his mind. And I'd name the quirk Boost. And even if Midoriya's base level of strength was equal to that of an average freshman student, given a couple minutes of multiplying his power, he'd get so strong that he'd be comparable to some of the top pro heroes. Just to put in perspective what I'm talking about, every minute that would pass, he would get 64 times stronger. And then by the end of the second minute, he would get 64 times stronger than that. So yes, if given only a couple minutes, he would go from the level of an average high school student to trading blows with All Might, and if you give him over 10 minutes of multiplying his power, his speed, strength, and durability would likely even be comparable to that of Prime All Might, and surpass it shortly afterwards.
I keep my friends on my mind, should repent. I need me some Jesus in my...
Alright, let's answer all of these. First one, Cell versus Marrow. First form Cell is strong enough to one-shot anyone in the Hunter x Hunter verse. And Marrow is no exception. Deku versus Gon. I've said this repeatedly, but current Deku destroys Gon, even in his adult form. Deku is island level, whereas adult Gon maxes out at city level plus. Gojo versus Goku. Current Goku absolutely dominates Gojo. There is absolutely zero contest in that fight. Deku versus Tanjiro. And despite the abilities Tanjiro unlocks in the manga, current manga Deku still absolutely destroys him. Now Goku versus Saitama. Base Goku folds Saitama with a bitch slap. All Might versus Escanor. Despite me liking All Might more, Escanor destroys the entire verse. Asta versus Deku. I do not see why people think this is even close of a fight. Asta wouldn't even need to swing his sword, just his physical attacks alone are strong enough they could kill Deku with a single shot. And finally, Natsu versus Ace. Natsu consumes fire. Ace is made of fire. Natsu will literally eat Ace. What if Midoriya had the 100 healings mark from Naruto? Well, you remember what Midoriya did with Eri against Overhaul? Yeah, that's basically what Deku would do, except from the start of the series. He'd be capable of using 100% of One For All from the start. All he'd have to do is take a break after each punch to let his body heal. Now, if I were to turn 100 healings into a quirk, I'd have it actually be a mutation quirk that he's born with, instead of something that just activates around age 5. Also, even if 100 healings classified as a quirk and then he got One For All, normally it would cut his lifespan down. But as we've seen in the case of Tsunade, using the 100 healings, she can significantly lengthen her lifespan. So even if the strain of One For All did cut down on his existing life, he could simply use the 100 healings to extend it back to its normal lifespan, or even further. Now, he'd still have to work to unlock all the other quirks, but at least he'd be capable of using all of One For All's physical power from the start if he needed to. What if Shigaraki was a Saiyan in Dragon Ball? Yeah, that's bad news for any villain. Firstly, because due to Shigaraki's quirk, unless the villain has regeneration or is straight up immortal, it wouldn't matter if the opponent was physically stronger or was more durable, because that quirk bypasses defenses. Especially if the quirk is at the same level as Shigaraki in the manga, who could decay entire cities in seconds. Plus, you gotta realize that he'd have the same personality as Shigaraki in My Hero. So you have a Saiyan that could use all the different Super Saiyan forms, as well as having not only Shigaraki's decay quirk, but the dozens, if not hundreds of other quirks All For One gave him, as well as all the quirks growing in strength as he grows in strength. He'd be a walking one-man army. Plus, Shigaraki in the manga has high-tier regeneration that can heal him faster than even Endeavor's flames can burn him. You combine endless regeneration with Saiyan biology, and if he wanted to, he could exploit the Zenkai boosts. So to put it simply, if Shigaraki had all of his powers as well as being a Saiyan, he'd straight up be a god. The Phantom Troop from Hunter x Hunter versus the League of Villains from My Hero Academia. And to be completely honest, if we are using both teams at their peak, then Shigaraki on his own effortlessly demolishes the entire Phantom Troop. Now, before I continue on and explain why, here is your spoiler warning for the events of the My Hero Academia War Arc. Now that I've given you your warning, I will continue. Firstly, Shigaraki's quirk got awakened to a level where he could decay an entire city down to its foundation with one hand in seconds. And to my knowledge, the Phantom Troop has no members that can fly, or could stay in the air long enough to be able to avoid Shigaraki's incoming decay wave. So they'd basically be sitting ducks with no way of defending themselves. But even if they could avoid the initial wave of decay, Shigaraki also got a massive amount of quirks from All For One. From air cannon to tracking quirks, insane regeneration, airwalk, kinetic impact recoil. Not to mention his regeneration is so fast that even Endeavor's prominence burn can't burn him fast enough to bypass the healing factor. And that's just Shigaraki. All the other members of the League wouldn't even be needed. Firstly, compress. If he touches you, he could compress your entire body or even parts of your body in completely removing them from you, like he did when he removed Overhaul's arms, or killed a pro hero by sealing the bottom half of his body away, therefore cutting him in half. If Toga had a member of the troop's blood, she could turn into them, which would deceive them, but if she possessed blood of one of the heroes that she's taken blood from, her awakened quirk allows her not only to copy their appearance, but she can also use their quirks. If we allowed Twice to participate, he could make clones of the other members just to make it even more impossible for the Phantom Troop to do anything. And Dobby's just a really unfair addition. To put it simply, the Phantom Troop would straight up give up hope, because they wouldn't have a single chance against Shigaraki, God forbid the whole League. What if Yondu, instead of having his regular magic arrow, had a stand arrow? For those that don't know what I'm talking about, think back to the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. It's the blue guy that whistles and makes an arrow shoot through you. Except instead replace the arrow he normally has with a regular stand arrow. Another thing I want you to think about. Remember how massive Yondu's crew was? He had multiple massive ships full of people. So if he wanted to, he could just take a day and use a stand arrow on every single person in his crew. Now yes, a large majority of them would die, because a majority of them wouldn't have what it takes to be able to manifest a stand. But due to the fact that there are hundreds of members of his crew, there is a good chance that a couple dozen of them would at least be able to manifest a stand. Meaning, despite the fact that 90% of his crew gets offed, the rest of them that did survive would have a stand. And having a couple dozen stand users working together is a terrifying thought. Even if the stands individually aren't that impressive, having a couple dozen of them working together would be insanely difficult, if not impossible, to deal with them all in a group. Plus, imagine if he stabbed Peter Quill, Star-Lord, with the stand arrow. Imagine the kind of stand that he would manifest. Seeing how if we're using the MCU Star-Lord, who was the son of Ego the Living Planet, basically a god, imagine how god-tier his stand would be. So yeah, Yondu and his crew could easily conquer worlds with just themselves. And if Ronin and his army were to attack Yondu's couple dozen people, despite the massive numbers advantage Ronin has, due to the fact that the couple dozen stand users would have powers that Ronin's soldiers wouldn't be able to sense or defend themselves against, would make it to where they can more than likely take down Ronin's army with only a couple dozen people. And who knows, maybe a bunch of Ronin's soldiers, which are in the tens of thousands if not millions, would join Yondu. And then he could use the stand arrow and repeat the process with all of them. And seeing how there'd be likely millions of soldiers that he'd be able to use the arrow on, he'd be able to manifest thousands of stand users. And the thought of thousands of stand users working as one unified team sounds like a living nightmare and absolute force of nature. To put it simply, Asta wouldn't need a grimoire if he had Saitama's potential. Because I think even Saitama fans can agree that Asta has trained exponentially harder than Saitama did. And good God, just look at Asta's physique, he's built like a Greek god. So with how much more intensely he trained than Saitama, by the time he went to the trial to see if he'd get a grimoire, he wouldn't even impress any of the Magic Knight captains, he'd straight up scare them. Because his physical capabilities would be so powerful that beginning of the series Asta would be thousands of times stronger than he is even in the current chapter of the manga. And if he did still get his grimoire and all of his powers and transformations with anti-magic, then the enemies would be truly hopeless against Asta. You're going up against someone who, without even the help of magic, is strong enough he could one-shot you, and has the ability to cancel out any of your magic attacks. Meaning, every enemy he goes up against would be absolutely powerless to stop him. And yes, he'd still get his transformations, but it would literally take nothing short of a god of the Black Clover universe to even get him to use them. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you're simply meaning pick a quirk from My Hero Academia that would fit these members of the Justice League. If this isn't what you meant and you want me to just come up with unique quirks that are specific for these people, just leave a comment and I will do so. But just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to do the video with just picking quirks from the show and giving them to them. Firstly, I'm going to start with Cyborg, and I'd give him Bakugo's Explosion quirk. Because Cyborg's already got a lot of powers that My Hero has just inferior versions of. Can't give him an intelligence quirk because he's literally connected to the internet. No point in giving him Tetsu Tetsu or Kirishima's quirk because he's already covered in metal. God, most of his body's made of metal now. And yes, he does have the ability to turn his arms into cannons. Now, I know he has a bunch of other weapons as well, but I think adding Bakugo's quirk would add just the right amount of firepower to greatly benefit Cyborg. Next up, we got Flash, and I would actually give him the quirk Danger Sense. Which, for those that don't know that much about My Hero Academia, it's basically the My Hero Academia equivalent of Spider-Man's Spider Sense. And giving that quirk to someone as fast as the Flash is honestly a broken combination. Next one is definitely the easiest. I would give Batman Nezu's Intelligence quirk. Batman is already intelligent, but you give him Nezu's quirk, and his intelligence would reach levels far beyond human limitations. Next up is probably the hardest one I had to come up with, and that's for Superman. Since he has a hell of a lot of powers and not very many weaknesses, I couldn't really come up with a quirk that could give him an extra boost, so I'll just give him One for All for thematic reasons. Since at least the nicer versions of Superman would be pretty close to being a symbol of peace like All Might. Now for Wonder Woman, you guys might think I'm gonna be like, oh, give her Momo's quirk. But no, I'd actually give her Tetsu Tetsu's quirk. From Class 1B, the guy that can make his body into metal. Wonder Woman is an incredibly powerful warrior, so giving her a quirk that would significantly heighten her defenses would work wonders for her. Next, Green Lantern. This one's a pretty easy one. I'll give him Momo's quirk. Because a Green Lantern ring already allows you to make constructs of anything you think of. And Momo's quirk can allow you to create any object that you want as long as you think of that object beforehand. Now, he really wouldn't use it in active combat when he has his ring. It would mostly be a backup in case his ring was either not on him or just really low on power. Now, for Aquaman, this one's probably the most boring. I would give him Koda's quirk from the training camp. You know, the kid that could shoot water. I was originally going to give him Froppy's quirk, but then I realized he can already do almost everything Froppy can. So it would be better to give him a quirk that could let him shoot out and control water. I am almost certain that there were only 3 things that fueled Vegeta to get Blue Evolution. Determination, willpower, and a hell of a lot of spite. He purely forced himself to unlock this form as a way to try to preserve his promise to Kaba in reviving Universe 6. Unlike Goku to get Ultra Instinct, he didn't need no Spirit Bomb catalyst or pushed to the edge by a fighter that was stronger than him at the time. He literally forced himself to break his limits the old-fashioned way, and allowed him to unlock a form that put him on par with Blue Kaioken times 20. And due to how this form doesn't put a strain on your body like the Kaioken does, this form is actually far superior to Blue Kaioken. This is one of the main reasons that I like Vegeta more than Goku. When Goku got Super Saiyan God and Ultra Instinct, it was technically handed to him. Super Saiyan God initially through the ritual, and in the case of Ultra Instinct, if it weren't for the Spirit Bomb, he wouldn't have even tapped into Ultra Instinct to begin with. Where in the case of Super Saiyan God and Super Saiyan Blue, Vegeta worked to get it the hard way. And same with surpassing Super Saiyan Blue. He didn't have any pre-existing technique like the Kaioken to fall back on for an extra power boost. So when he was backed into a corner, he had to force himself to be able to unlock a brand new power so he wouldn't be left in the dust. Same thing in the manga with Vegeta's new God of Destruction form, whereas Goku's simply refining Ultra Instinct, making it to where even Blue Evolution Vegeta was significantly weaker than him. Vegeta worked himself to the bone to acquire the power of a god, and not only refining his power, but refining himself as a person, clearing his mind of the emotions that limited his power. Same with Goku with Ultra Instinct.